Hey everybody, Simone here with Bulletproof Business Growth, as always with insights and ideas and really important facts for what to pay attention to when you're growing and scaling your business and you're in that transition from where you're working a whole lot in your business to setting up all the right people and systems and processes so that you can actually get to work on your business, which means you can actually grow and scale. So today I want to talk a little bit about the art of giving feedback, which, it can either, in terms of that can go, is it, if you're doing it right and you're delivering it powerfully in the right way, and there's really a right way and a wrong way, it can be gold. Or if you don't know how to do it, and you're engaging in all sorts of wrong ways to do it, it can be a disaster and it can seriously damage your relationship. So when you think about, giving feedback, it's such an amazing opportunity and a big responsibility for anybody, managers, leaders, anybody who leads people, because it's giving you the opportunity to help people improve what's not optimal yet, and also to help them grow, to help them get better and better, which of course is a huge benefit for both you and them, because of course for them, they're getting more valuable in their careers, and for you, because you're getting to benefit from that value. And also, especially when you've been working with people for quite a while, it's your opportunity, it's your moment to wake them up, because generally what happens when people do like the same thing and you don't have necessarily a growth plan for them, you are not necessarily challenging them with something new frequently, so they're doing the same thing over and over and over, they go to sleep, they go on autopilot, they forget to look a step ahead, they forget to look at the big picture. And if you're not an optimal leader and that's not practices you engage with them on, they start declining, their performance starts declining rapidly, and before you know it, they're missing a whole bunch of stuff. So it's to wake them up, it's to help them engage or re-engage, and it's always a really powerful way to build your relationship with them, to improve it, and to cement that trust and loyalty. Because when you show up as somebody who cares, who comes at this from the right perspective, and who makes them feel like you are actually for them and not against them, which is one of the big pitfalls that can happen when you don't do the feedback thing the right way. Well, when all that goes the right way, they want to show up for you. So, and you hear me say this all the time, all these behaviors, all these newer ways of doing things are incredibly important for your biggest labor and talent pool, which are the younger generations, because things have changed a ton. It's not just about, tell them what to do and they'll do it, and that's the last thing you need to do. The younger generations expect career development opportunities. They expect that there's a growth plan. They expect that they are provided tools that help them get better and better. And look, I know for many of you, giving feedback is like going to the dentist. You'd rather get a root canal rather than, giving feedback, because for many, it's that conflict avoidance. Maybe because you don't know how to do it right, or in the past, when you've given somebody feedback, it's gone horribly wrong. It's that fear of conflict thing. And look, there all sorts of uncomfortable things can happen. So definitely, I know there can be quite a bit of trepidation around this. But when you're not engaging in this practice regularly, lots of opportunity gets lost, because this is really one of your best teaching opportunities. This is where you get to be their coach and their mentor. And I'm sure you've heard me go off on how useless I think reviews are when you're thinking about performance reviews, annual, biannual, however some big companies do it, where once a year somebody shows up and tells you how you're doing, which I think is a terrible practice, because are you going to wait this long to tell somebody what they need to deal with? And you're welcome still to have performance reviews, of course, when it's a formal event that comes out of many other events that preceded in the year, where everybody already knows where they're at, where everybody already knows, like, this is just a summary of something that they've already heard before and there are no surprises. That's totally great. That's fine. But if that's the only thing that happens throughout the year, you're not going to do extremely well, and you're certainly not going to build a feedback culture. And that's what we want to build. We want to build a culture in which feedback is not just appreciated, it's craved, it's people seek it. They are open to giving each other feedback between peers, up and down and all across. Because look, we all think, like, even when you have the best intentions, even when you truly are trying to do your best job possible, what you think you're doing and effective and what others see is often really, really different. So it's very, very valuable to get other people's perspective on your performance. So it's maximizing improvement is kind of like the right thing at the right time for optimal implementation. So the most challenging aspect of people management is to get this piece right, because as I said, when you do it wrong, it damages your relationships and it crushes people's motivation. But when you do it right, it can truly transform performance and foster immense growth. So the number one requirement to get this right is EQ, emotional intelligence. And because what that means is the ability to navigate relationships and make better decisions. So having high EQ means you're able to connect with your team, with your employees on a deeper level. And because one of the biggest pain points that most business owners have is infrequent, missing, or bad communication between everybody. And of course, when that's happening, there's a lot that gets lost in the cracks. So EQ, emotional intelligence, improves communication, it improves trust and collaboration, which of course, those are the three kind of golden words that everybody wants to be able to say about their organization. So everybody wants this. And the key ingredient in emotional intelligence and EQ is empathy. So that it's your ability to put yourself into another person's shoes, to understand their perspectives, to understand their feelings. And when you can demonstrate that, people feel heard, they feel valued, and they're much more open to receiving. So how do you get this right? Where do you start? Well, it starts with intention. So, because put yourself into the other person's shoes, right? When you realize that you're about to be given feedback, for most people, that's a scary moment. Because it's always that, like, oh, wow, what's happening? What did I do? I didn't think I did anything wrong. So it's kind of like guard goes up. So it's like when people know it's coming, it's like that fight and flight response. They're likely to get defensive. And the second they get defensive, of course, they can't hear. They can't actually receive what you are about to tell them. So, of course, that means you're wasting your breath, and now everybody's time gets wasted. So it's very important to set the right intention, to set it up, to frame it correctly. So one of the ways I love to include in this is before even starting the conversation, or as the beginning of the conversation, frame this by saying, hey, my positive intention from this conversation is, and then say whatever it is that you're going to talk about. But it's not about what you talk about, it's about the outcome that you're going to talk about. So to improve blah, 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 right? So something like that. So you always want to set this frame, because what that does is when you say, hey, my positive intention, right? The second you say that, the other person's mind relaxes a little bit, because they're going, okay, there's something good in here. This is not just I'm going to get yelled at. This is actually, we're going to make something good out of this. And this is super important to receive the other person's cooperation, which you truly, truly need for this, because this has to be a two-way conversation. You're not about to give a one-way lecture. This is truly a dialogue and not a monologue. So your job here is to start the conversation, to provide facts, and then to listen. And, as kind of a preamble before, like once you said this whole thing, my positive intention for this conversation is X, then you want to start with balancing the positive and the areas for development. So you start with what you appreciate about them. People are more receptive to feedback if you first acknowledge the value that they actually deliver, what is going well. So what that does is it establishes credibility. It shows that you see the whole picture and not just their flaws, which is what they want to know, because hey, everybody screws up, everybody makes mistakes, and that doesn't devaluate their whole performance. It just says, hey, this particular thing that you're doing isn't going so well, so let's talk about how to make that better. All right, so now there's 5-6 steps to how to actually do this in the most powerful way possible. So step 1, like I mentioned before, is you're here to provide facts. And this is a hugely important piece, is because you want to keep this neutral. You want to say something like, hey, I have noticed XYZ, and then you describe certain behaviors, certain situations, something like that. It's come to my attention. So what's important in this is to keep your feelings and your reactions or your assumptions out of the conversation. This is really where you fully describe the issue and you give specifics about it and you include examples. So everybody is 100% clear what you're actually talking about. What's terrible is like a vague statement like, hey, you just need to improve, you need to get better, because that doesn't give anybody any clarity or any idea where to focus their energy. So that's just like, hey, I suck, right? I suck overall. So it's got to be focused and specific so everybody understands exactly what we're actually talking about. So you want to call out observable behaviors, not something that's like vague and hidden, but it's pretty clear. Not everybody has, but it's been very noticeable what they have said, done, or how they've behaved. And here's a big one. Like sometimes when you bring something up like that, like I mentioned before, people's guard may go up, and people who don't have very good communication skills may want to immediately defend themselves. So it could be that, I got some water here. It could be that they start talking over you because they want to immediately set the facts straight. So if they interrupt you, if that happens, and sometimes even with best intentions and best behavior, when you get triggered, when your buttons get pushed, you might forget that you're here to listen, right? So if they interrupt, if they start defending themselves, you have to politely ask them to hold their thoughts and to listen for now, that they will get the opportunity to share their perspective. So, and that piece, right? And once people have worked with you for a little while, they will know, and they won't even have that issue. But if that happens in the beginning or when you first start leading somebody, just put their mind at ease by saying, hey, totally get it that you have your own perspective, and I promise I will ask you for it, but for the moment, please just let me finish what I'm saying, and then we'll get to your perspective of it. Because so step 1, you state the facts neutrally. Step 2 is, and this is really important, you want to describe the impact of their behavior. So, and not just their behavior on you, but it's like, whatever they're doing, the impact on you is X. And then the next thing you want to talk about, the impact on the team, the impact of the company. Because when you do that, it removes ambiguity and doubt, and it lets you expand that this, what may be something that seems very small, the much bigger consequences this small thing has. Look, you wouldn't be bringing it up if it's truly something small that doesn't matter. The reason you're bringing it up is because it does matter, and because apparently they don't know that it matters, because otherwise, why would they be doing this thing, right? So a lot of times, it's something really small, like some people have issues with timeliness. So if your business relies on somebody being somewhere on time, well, even if they're just 5 minutes late, no big deal to them, right? So they might be thinking, oh, I'm just 5 minutes late. I can make that up later. I can stay late a little bit. No big deal. But what they're not recognizing is that now 10 other people are waiting for 5 minutes, which that's 50 minutes of productivity lost. But they haven't connected the dots. They're not thinking about that aspect. All they're thinking about is they would like 5 more minutes to enjoy their coffee or whatever they're doing. So by getting that impact description, by you expanding it for them and connecting the dots for them, they might just realize, you know what, those 5 minutes are actually a really big deal. So they need to know that. And remember, keep the emotions out on that. Really stick to the facts. And when you talk, right, watch your tone, watch your body language, because this is where you either win or lose them. Because if they feel like you're about to attack them, or if you're being, if they feel judged, if they feel like you're going to yell at them, if there's negativity to the way that you're speaking and projecting your energy, you lose them. So, and this is of course important, because the second you lose them, they're not hearing you. So like I said earlier, you might as well forget it. So the second they see it, we want to make sure they don't go into being defensive. So again, when you're providing opportunity, this is your opportunity. When you're providing feedback, this is your opportunity for growth and not for personal judgment on their character or on their skill. So assume good intent and focus on the behaviors that you're talking about, or a situation, right? This could be a situation that just occurred. It's not about their person. So that's step number 2, provide the impact, right? And then number 3, this is where they get to talk. So ask for feedback on your feedback. So ask them, hey, is this making sense? Do you disagree? Do you need any clarification on this? And then as they speak about that, tell them, hey, I really want to hear what your perspective is on this. How do you feel about this? And here's the thing. Now you listen. They listened before, and now you listen. Completely, like, give them the time and the space to unpack this. Because if they feel like that you're really listening and that you care about what they're saying, you're in a much, much better place. So this is where you build that credibility. That's where you build the trust with them. And while you're listening, you want to watch for their intention. What was their intention when this occurred? Listen for that piece. Was this like an honest to God mistake, and that's a one-off and they just kind of screwed up that day? Was it an accident, or did this happen because they actually don't care, because they were nefarious, neglectful, whatever, they just didn't care? Because what we want to know is, was this a once-off, or is this a pattern? Because if it was a once-off, it's not a big deal. Everybody makes mistakes. Even if it was a bigger mistake, well, we have to mitigate it. But the biggest thing you want to know is this a pattern? Is this how this person shows up from here on out? Is this something I have to expect will happen again? So this is where you collect really important information, and this information will heavily color your next step here. So you must know what the intention was, so that you can shape your reaction and your ask for later. So because here's number 4, this is where you make requests. So you want to think about, like, from what you just heard, what would you like them to do differently? And you want to include behavior in terms of how they show up, right? And also specific direction. And as always, be as specific as possible and include ways for them to measure if they're being successful, right? Because if, again, the more broad, the more general you are in this conversation, the harder it will be for both of you to gauge, are we actually making progress? Is this going in the right direction? So be specific, make your requests in a way so that both of you can measure, is their change successful or not? So that's step 4. And step 5 is agree on action steps. And again, these are where you get really specific, and you want to request them to be SMART. So SMART, we always spell with 2 S's because it's shared, as in it's transparent, it's public, everybody knows about it, it's specific, it's measurable, it's aligned, it's relatable, and it's timely. So those action steps need to be specific so that we have accountability in this piece. Because if there's no accountability, if we don't actually know if those steps are being carried out, because there's no measure to it, if there's no specificity to it, why are we even talking? So once you have made the request and mapped out action steps with them, right? Because the action step piece is a little bit of like, you tell them what you want, but also you ask them, hey, what can we do about it? What do you think is going to make this better? So this, ideally, the action steps are something that you collaborate on, so that, because the more of them is in those action steps, the more they're going to actually be accountable and own that change. So you want to ask, is there anything you disagree with? And then shape that agreement around the next steps together, so that that person can really feel ownership over improving. So, you might wonder, okay, sounds pretty simple here. What could possibly go wrong? Now, what could go wrong here? There's quite a few things, but the biggest thing is if it's not timely, right? So make sure it's timely. When something happens that needs changing, don't wait at all. Like, make sure you're in a neutral frame of mind, right? So if it's something that happened that made you angry and pissed off, well, take a breath, take a walk, make sure that you simmer down and feel cool, calm, and collected before you have that conversation. But don't wait so long that nobody remembers anymore what actually happened. Because the longer the time gap between the situation and the conversation, the more distorted the whole memory gets, and then it also becomes totally unrelatable. So make sure you deliver this feedback timely. Global judgments. Make sure, I've been saying over and over, keep it specific. Make sure you deliver examples that really illustrate what happened, and especially the impact of it, right? Make sure that you can really illustrate the impact of what the situation had, because the more examples you give them, the more they can relate to it. So make sure that you don't issue any global judgments. The third thing that could go wrong is punitive tone or setup, where you come at this situation, like I said, either with anger or your intention is to criticize more than to give feedback. So, and this is, it's a fine line. You might not think that that it really matters, but when your intention behind this is to be constructive, and that your intention is that you want to have a discussion with them to improve something, that comes off very differently than when you're just pissed off and you want to yell at them. Okay, so make sure that it's not a punitive conversation. 4, if you're not framing it correctly and leading with the positive intention, like I said, and if you're not leading with positives about their performance so that they can be encouraged in the conversation. So always start with those two things I said. My positive intention for this conversation is, and start by saying, hey, these are things that we really value you for. Hopefully you have some of those. And then, of course, number 5, making it personal is a big no-no. So stick to the facts, talk about behaviors and not attributes. Number 6, don't get into lecturing. You want to make sure you listen, because the second you start talking at somebody, it shuts down the conversation. What you really want is for the conversation to open up so you can understand what's actually really going on. Because, like, honestly, if I summed it down in one statement, why you want to give feedback or ask these questions, so that you understand what really happened. Because that's still kind of out in the ether. You don't really understand that yet. So you have to understand that before you can go anywhere else. So make sure that you open up the conversation so that you can get that. And then number 7 is that when you're having this whole conversation, but you're not discussing what the next steps are out of this, because you need something concrete to tie your conversation to, or you lose all the power in the conversation. So you already discussed the issue, you already discussed the impact, you got their perspective. Well, in many feedback sessions, this is where it stops, and everybody, kumbaya, feels better, we've talked about it, but then the thing just continues because we didn't actually talk about, what we want, how we want things to go differently, and what specifically we need to do so that things will go better. So make sure you discuss those next steps and get agreement on those next steps. Another thing that could go horribly wrong is if you pick poor timing. So before you have a feedback session with somebody, I honestly always ask. I say, hey, you know what? I have some feedback for you. Are you in a good state to listen? And this is where they give permission. Are you open to some coaching? Is generally the question that I ask. And when somebody says no to you, you have to respect that piece, because maybe they just had a fight with their spouse. Maybe it's just a shitty day for them and they're not in a state to be receptive. And again, if they're not in a coachable state, you're not going to make any headway. So ask if they're open to receiving some feedback. And if they're not at that very moment, well, then let's talk about when that's better. Okay, maybe, how about tonight at 5 or tomorrow at 10 or whatever it is. But there's got to be a counter offer. There's got to be a counter that you agree on instead, okay? And then, of course, one of the biggest faux pas is not having any follow-up. So you had this whole conversation, you went through all the steps, you walked away with specifics and concrete steps to go forward, and then nobody ever pays attention to, is this actually getting resolved? So when somebody makes an effort, and this is so important, when somebody makes an effort because you asked them to, they're changing something. And look, change is hard for all humans. So they're changing something and nobody's noticing. Do you think they're going to continue? No. They're going to go right back to what it was that they're doing when you weren't happy, because it's just easier for them. So when somebody shows up coachable, let them know, hey, I'm noticing you're doing a good job. Because not to fuel their ego, it's much more around, you want to give them the feedback that you see it's going the right direction, and you don't just approve it, but you really appreciate it. So big deal to do that. I gave you a good number of really actionable steps here to make sure that you don't just give feedback, but that you give it right. And also that you do this on a regular basis. I would really recommend that you have one-on-ones with everybody, all your direct reports, at least once a week, and giving feedback is a really important component of having those one-on-ones. And look, when you build a culture of feedback where that is something that's appreciated, not just accepted, but appreciated and called for, well, it's no big deal. And that's really what I would so encourage you to build in your business, a culture of feedback, where everybody's open to that, including you. So as a summary here is delivering feedback takes practice, but it truly transforms how people excel, and especially when you do it with empathy, with specifics, and with care for the whole human and not just this one thing that kind of went wrong, okay? So I hope this helps. We're always happy to hear from you if there's any questions that you have. If you want more details and more training, we have a really good new training out there, and I'll put the link to the video in the comments below. It goes into what we've just been talking about in much more detail. So make sure you watch the video. Let us know if you have any other questions, and have a fabulous week. I'll see you next time.